Dark Souls, a franchise known for its ridiculously hard boss fights and an intriguing world design. A franchise that has pioneered the way for other Souls-like games to gain more and more traction. With the Dark Souls games being met with shock of how hard they are, I wonder what these games would be like as an introduction to gaming for a non-gamer. As I witnessed my friend, who barely plays any games, dive into Dark Souls 1, after every turn, he was always asking the same exact question. What now? From the early days of making a non-gamer play a variety of games, within this somewhat of an experiment, he would always gravitate towards games that provide more help to get past a certain point. Games that held your hand. The likes of Zelda and Assassin's Creed were very much a positive in his journey to becoming a gamer. But when he was thrown into the world of Dark Souls, that very much changed. When first playing the Dark Souls games, he struggled to understand what was meant of him, what he was supposed to do. The main reason for this is the lack of guidance within these games, as you are meant to wander and find your way, which did annoy him a little bit. As with being a non-gamer trying to get into games, it can be hard to find joy in something new, where you constantly have to understand what is needed of you. But nevertheless, he moved on from this stress of little guidance. And in little time, he stumbled upon his first boss fight, the Asylum Demon. Now, with the mage class that he picked, not knowing what it meant for him, I quickly had to explain that the whole point of a mage class is to get distance from the enemy in order to be able to use spells. Frustratingly for him, the boss fight is in somewhat of a small building, making it difficult for him to find that distance needed, which caused for a lot of deaths and a lot of anger towards this. In terms of the fights, he always seemed to be dealt the bad hand in many aspects, as many of these boss fights were easier to deal with as a warrior or a knight. And with all these setbacks, he began to feel overwhelmed that he wasn't progressing at all within the games, which at that point I had to step in and give him a few pointers. Ultimately, they helped a little, but he still seemed to feel stuck, with the long walks back to the boss arena allowing for him to gather more negative thoughts about the game. This slow, grueling nature of the Souls games were almost enough to turn this non-gamer off, as he whined to go back to what he was doing before. But as any experimenter does, I made him sit back down and further master the Souls games, so that he can become a true gamer. But there was ultimately another setback. For the most part, the only way to thrive in a game as difficult as Dark Souls is to ultimately get better, which means spending time. However, this time or lack thereof was a massive turn-off for my non-gamer, who doesn't have the attention span that can work with countless hours of Dark Souls gameplay. So to combat this, I made him watch a guide. Not just any guide, but a guide in which illustrates the reasons to love Dark Souls. In this attempt to switch his mindset back into gaming, I was trying to work up some motivation for him to play it, trying to spark that gaming joy. And it ultimately worked. He hopped straight back in and gamed tirelessly from day to night, and he did eventually find progress and got past countless bosses. However, with every step he took, he also found it more and more difficult to find his way, with some of the later bosses being so difficult that it took him up to 3 hours to beat some of them. One boss that was mentioned very many times was the Capra Demon. With the boss room being up several flights of stairs and narrow twists and turns, he would inevitably run into endless enemies at his wake. And for him being new to gaming as a whole, he did not have the skill to just run past them. And when he would try to do so, it would be met with either a stab in the back or being mauled by dogs. So as anyone would, He just had to suck it up and kill them one by one. But the problem with this is that you have to do this every time you died to the Capra demon. So as one with as little experience as him, he had to repeat this process around about 30 times until I told him that there was another way in. And I know I probably should have told him much sooner, but the fact is, I wanted to see how he handled all these setbacks, which was as expected, not well at all. I remember something that he said which has stuck with me for a while now. Dark Souls is like trying to solve a puzzle in a haunted house. Your mind is occupied with other things happening around you, and it makes for the overall experience to be much harder than expected. And I can see what he means by that. Dark Souls games often make you wander to find bosses, and in that search you stumble upon many enemies, and even within a boss fight you have to remove obstacles that helps the boss become stronger. And with all this, to a non-experienced gamer, it can become overwhelming, much like what happened to my friend, who started to get confused with what he needed to do, which ultimately made for his gaming ability to be weakened. And eventually, he got sick and tired of having to run through countless enemies just to get back to the boss itself. However, through the countless hours that was put into Dark Souls, he still felt like everything that was presented to him was just confusing him even more, to the point in which he got tired of endlessly running about and dying to bosses and enemies. And I understand what he is getting at. For a non-gamer, to be thrown into the likes of Dark Souls is a really daunting task. And even though he did not enjoy most of what the game provided, he was given a glimpse of what true hardcore gaming looks like, and he will eventually give some other titles a try down the track.